Hi, Chris. Welcome to today's show. I'm so pleased that you can be here joining me. And I am excited to say that we're sitting here in the slightly rainy Alps, enjoying the conversation that we're about to have. Chris, we've got loads to talk about today. So, are you happy if I dive straight in?
Yes, please do.
Chris, you and I have been obviously friends and working together for some time. And I wanted to start by asking you, how has your experience of sophrology influenced your journey so far?
Um, I think it's transformed my journey, to be perfectly honest. I think maybe if I talk about Chris 1 and then Chris 2, really, and Chris 2 is using sophrology as a way to move forward with the latter part of my life. Um, and I think before I started it, I didn't really have an understanding of what was possible. But as I've gone through that journey and I've understood around meditation, and breathing exercises and talking, it's been amazing the impact it's had on me and all the things that I've learned, the things that I'm putting into action as I kind of progress through my latter part of my life, really.
That's amazing. That's an incredible intro, Chris. From a sort of get go, can you remind me how you came to sophrology? Because it's not something that you were aware of, although you are in Europe. How did you get to be in that sophrology room?
Um, I was having a challenging period after COVID with our business. There's always challenges being, I suppose, an entrepreneur and running your own business. And I spoke to a friend of mine who had already been and used sophrology, who recommended that maybe this is something that I could look into and potentially try to see whether it would help me through these challenging periods. Um, and so gave me a recommendation, and I used that recommendation almost immediately to kick things off to see what it was all about and how I could maybe start to engage with sophrology to progress, through my life effectively.
Think it's interesting because in my own journey, it is that referral that drives these connections and these relationships, which means that I end up with a really interesting cohort of clients to work with. And you mentioned both entrepreneurship and the challenges of COVID. I wonder if you might just expand, Chris, on because this is something I'm seeing a lot in the clinic post COVID changes, challenges physically, mentally, and emotionally. How was that experience for you as an entrepreneur, as a creative, as a dad, and obviously as a human being?
Hmm. Okay. Well, I'd say there were both positives and negatives for me that came out of COVID. The positive was that, um, and this doesn't sound positive, but it turns out that it was that um, everything stopped. And I was at that point traveling to and from the UK. I was doing a consulting job. We were looking for businesses to assist in a turnaround state. And I was traveling all the time. I was back to the UK every week. I was leaving at 4 a.m. on a Tuesday, coming back kind of a midnight on a Thursday or Friday. And when COVID came along, that stopped, and it gave me a point, I suppose, for reflection. The other side, which wasn't so good, was I suppose, the financial pressure that COVID placed on myself and my wife. Um,
Mm.
we didn't get access to the funds. We're based in France. We didn't get access to the funds that we were expecting to help support us through that period, and that placed a huge strain on us. So on one side, I had an opportunity to reflect. To the other side, I was extremely concerned about our financial status and the situation with the finances. Um, and so whilst in COVID, I started to think over maybe what else could I do. And I suppose it's coming back to the positive side, because that's what I want to look at is where else could we go with our lives, and could we start another business? And I think COVID gave me that opportunity to reflect and to consider my options, and then to start to investigate what else could we do, which meant that I wasn't traveling to and from the UK so frequently, and I wasn't missing my children growing up as much as I was at that moment in time. And so it set us on a new path. In fact, we were under a financial strain, but we were able to change direction through that period. And so, quite bizarrely, it allowed us to change direction, but it then put us under more stress, because obviously we were then trying to start a new business, trying to find our way through this very financially challenging period. We were in lockdown the same as everyone else, but we had some space outside. We exercised at home regularly. So that side of things wasn't so effective. It was more the lack of, we can't do anything right now, and we've got this pressure, but we could do some planning, so that when we came out the other side, we could potentially change direction and move forward in a different way.
That's an amazing story, Chris. And thank you so much for sharing that, because I work with quite a lot of business owners, leaders and entrepreneurs, and the experience does vary from COVID. You know, you've explained how you used that time to become more present, reflect, and actually use it as a point of transformation. And we'll talk more about that journey afterwards. But what I'm also seeing is people have come out of COVID with a real sense of fear, frustration and powerlessness, and that's still manifesting itself sometimes in their behavior subconsciously. You know, knowing what can happen now when we do have a pandemic has changed people's mindset and created, I think, really this fight or flight response that is happening that they probably weren't experiencing before. And you've explained how you've actually come through that and out the other side, and you're now obviously in a position where your business is thriving, although with its challenges, and things look quite different a couple of years later.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I
Chris,
would say.
Sorry, carry on.
No, I would say that that it was a very, very challenging period for nearly everyone I've spoken to, and I think that had we not had options, which we were very fortunate to have, you know, things could have been very different. The outcome could have been very different. But we did have time, and we were afforded that time through things that we'd done, you know, set ourselves up previously. But I can imagine for many people, without that time, it would have been incredibly, incredibly challenging, even more so through that period.
Yes, and I think it was a challenging time for everybody. And of course, some people went one way and some people went the other. Some people, it became a transformational time. That was certainly my own experience. But for other people, it became a time of great threat that they're still not quite recovered from. And I use the word PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. I think we're seeing some of that now coming out in people's physical, mental and emotional states. Especially when we start looking at the nervous system. Obviously, you've been a Whoop user. You've seen how that data shows when you're super relaxed or not. Tell me a bit about Whoop, because you have had it, you've used it, and it was quite effective for you, to give you a window.
Yeah, no, I mean, I used it for a year, and I'd never actually used anything like that in the past at all. And I suppose you sometimes check in on yourself and wonder, you know, how do I feel today? And, you know, sometimes you can't really put your finger on it, but you kind of think maybe I'm not. Well, the great thing about Whoop is that it kind of gives you that detail. It kind of reinforces your understanding of your oneself, or in fact enhances your understanding of oneself, and shows you, you know, kind of, you know, for example, the effect of alcohol. You know, one of the things that I've definitely done since using Whoop is reduce intake, and because it's amazing how, you know, I suppose when you're not using Whoop, you kind of shake it off. When you're using Whoop, you actually see the daily effect, not just the following morning effect of alcohol on your performance. And I love to do sport. I like to run, cycle, etc. And you can see the effect that has on your performance, not over just one day, but over multiple days, which I suppose for my case, it encouraged me to not drink so much and actually, make sure that I'm at the best I can be to do the activities that I really want to do and to get the most out of the activities that I really wanted to do. So I think Whoop is an amazing product, and it's amazing what it shows you. And there's a lot you can learn. You can learn about yourself from using Whoop.
I love that, and I think it's a bit like I grew up driving. I learned to drive in a 1963 Austin A40. So you'll remember that the rev counter didn't really work. You changed gear on feel. Everything was done by the sensations that you were experiencing. A bit like not wearing a Whoop. I now drive an electric car. It does everything for me, and it's all there on the digital dashboard. And I feel like Whoop is sort of that equivalent. You drive, you turn the digital dashboard on, and you think, "Oh, this is interesting." But then when you turn it off, you've got the feel back.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think
Isn't it?
it's a great way to check in on yourself. And I think, especially if you're going through a challenging period, which I was, I think it was a really good sense check and a great way to see improvement. So I think, if you haven't used it, definitely give it a go, because I think all of those things where you can see improvement and know you're going in the right direction really assist you with keeping motivated and pushing on effectively.
Absolutely.
And if also it gives you a point of starting, and I think you can almost gamify Whoop, and so there's this element of I'm here today. Okay, right, I'm going to challenge myself and let me see, actually, statistically, am I improving? Not just how I feel myself, but actually, this is actually really working. So, I used it, and I think I used it through that period to effect.
Absolutely. And I love the fact that you talk about gamifying this process of emotional, physical, and mental transformation, because as you know, I have a lot of male clients and a lot of men over 45. Weirdly, it appears to be becoming a bit of a niche. I think that is because I work with this health data that you can see, and that is very, very appealing to men. And it gives you this opportunity to look at the stats and think, actually, do I want to change some of this, or actually do I not care? And when you've seen it, Chris, you can't unsee it. When you've had, a
No,
bottle of red on a Sunday night,
no,
it doesn't
exactly.
bode so well on your for a Monday morning. Chris, you are an incredibly keen cyclist, both road and extreme downhill mountain biking, beyond
Oh, wow.
anything I've seen in many people. Tell me about sophrology, the experience you've had, and obviously this mind body awareness and how that's played out in your cycling experiences.
Yeah, so I suppose more recently, predominantly, it's really, I suppose, affected, mountain biking. Thank you for calling me extreme. I'm not sure that my boys would necessarily agree with that, but we live in the mountains. Um, I ride all the trails that are around here, and to a lot of people they would be, extreme. And when you're riding those kind of trails, and whether it's actually downhilling trails or whether it's jumping, which is something I've really focused on over the last year. There's a lot of mind challenges, especially when you get a bit older, about, I suppose you're going in thinking, what are all the things that could possibly happen? Or you're going down, a very technical, steep descent, and you're spotting all of these things that, could potentially be red flags of where things could possibly go wrong. And I think the way that I've used for sophrology for this is to just be much calmer and not look to what might happen, but just focus on keep placing myself in the present. And I think that this is, by the way, this is not a very easy thing to do from the outset. I mean, this takes practice, and it doesn't always work perfectly for me. But, when I'm at the top, I am using breathing to help me to roll into some of these lines, and I am trying to place myself in the center rather than letting these other thoughts get in, because as soon as they do, you can almost guarantee you're either not going to do it or you're gonna have a wobble. And I think with jumping, you're looking at a jump and you're kind of gradually building up, and sometimes it takes quite a lot of courage to roll into some of these actual features, and you have to be in the right mindset to do it. And if you're not, the best thing to do is always walk away. And I think that sophrology has helped me prepare, I suppose, somewhat for doing this, and also for helping me not just prepare but being in that moment. And I think when you're doing these kind of challenges, which to me they are, you don't want to fall. I've had enough falls and I've broken enough bones, and at this age I really just want to get it hopefully right, or slightly not right, but not resolving into a crash. So I think sophrology has had a big impact on that for me, really, really, and being calm and being centered and being prepared to do these sports.
I
Absolutely.
think they are life-changing skills, that ability to be present, visualize, and as you say, put yourself at the center. We were watching the ladies' Red Bull challenge in Utah this
Or
weekend.
rampage.
The Rampage, first time women have ever been allowed to ride it. And they had them mic'd up, so you were listening to their visual, their prep that they were going through, their self-talk. And it was, the technical the technical trail, I mean, it's just insane, isn't it? Watching what they're
Yeah,
doing,
unbelievable.
but the way they're prepping their mind and their body, they're in it, and they're prepping it visually, physically, mentally, and then when they get there and it doesn't go quite so well, you see obviously what conversations they're having with themselves. I mean, it's a mind game.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think they openly talk about it actually during the show. How challenging it is for them. Not just getting there, spotting the lines, building the lines, but then obviously someone's got to try them. And actually, I didn't talk about visualization, but actually that is one huge element of sophrology for me as well, particularly with jumping and visualizing myself on some of the features that exist here, and saying to myself, actually, I can see myself going off these. And when the ladies are talking about going in, you understand that, like you say, it is an unbelievable mind game, because they've got the skills, but when you're looking at the features, I mean, to get yourself off some of these and the risk that is presented to you is just quite extraordinary. Quite extraordinary, potentially kind of life or death, or very, very, very serious injury. And so, they really do have to manage themselves. Not just in terms of their body strength and their bike skills, but also their mental agility to be able to do these things. And I suppose I like it. My wife works with Jenny Jones, and Jenny talks to her a lot about the Olympics, and obviously the mental preparation that goes into just doing one run or two runs, and having practiced for such a long period of time to be able to remain calm as you put everything on the line for like a matter of a minute. And it's quite extraordinary how these amazing athletes can keep themselves focused, centered, and able to do that. And I'm not saying that I'm one of these athletes, but I I use it to do it in my world. My challenges. I couldn't stand at the top and do that in the Olympics, but I've got my own challenges here that I focus on and say, right, I want to do this. How do I go about getting myself prepared to be able to do this?
It's a fascinating world, isn't it, when you start looking at physical, mental prep and how it works together. and I'm working with a youth athlete at the moment, and it's in the head. It's managing all those other elements, the stress, the breathing, the heart rate, as well as that physical, have I been in the gym? Am I strong enough? Am I fit enough?
Mm.
It's a world that I just think is endlessly fascinating. And that's where the edge is for somebody like Jenny Jones, like you say. And for us who want to push and
Yeah.
experience as much as we can, how do we do that safely and as effectively without, retiring to the sofa and thinking, oh, well, we'll dump our extreme sports and retire now, which is not what you or I want from
No, I
life.
think no, I think it's equally applicable to someone like myself in my 50s as it is to someone who's in their 20s. It's just maybe the features are slightly different, as it were, but
Yes.
still that, it's still using these amazing skills that you get from Sophrology to get you through those potential challenges. Yeah, whether it's on a bike or whether it's in business, or whether it's a huge feature or not. Yeah.
And if you haven't watched Red Bull Rampage, can I suggest you do, whether you're interested in downhill biking or not, because it is wild, absolutely
Wild.
wild. Chris, can I ask you about visualization? Because you and I have used that for prepping other situations outside of sport with great effect.
Mm. Yeah, so I think I suppose a recognition of oneself is quite important, and I'm very good with sort of one-to-one, small group kind of relationships, and I have very, very close friends, and I suppose that's just about me and the way that I am. And so what I sometimes find more challenging is to go into environments when there's lots and lots of people, and we've used Sophrology to prepare for that and visualize, how that arrival might look, how those engagements might look whilst in this kind of very busy, not necessarily confrontational, but probably in some instances quite confrontational environments. And, how do you keep yourself level and calm? And I suppose in a lot of ways, maximize those situations which, you may find yourself in, and you may not want to be in, but you do find yourselves in. How do you maximize those what could potential opportunities, and visualization of being preparation, visualization, going to those kind of events and being at those events beforehand has actually worked wonders for me and has really helped me kind of take the edge out of turning up and doing what you do at kind of quite large events, whether they're social events or whether they're kind of networking events. It works equally as well for both, and it's a
And
skill
you'll
that I'd
hear
never had
people
before.
talk. I'm so pleased you said that, because it's something we have this dread sometimes, don't we? We're going somewhere we don't actually want to go, whether it's the doctors or a big speaker, but whatever it is, and we're going in thinking I don't want this. But by changing it into what do I want to feel when I get there, and then stepping through that process, it's quite simple. You're prepping those neural pathways, you're prepping those emotional responses, so when you do get there, as you've experienced, boom, it
Yeah,
happens.
you put that very eloquently. I didn't explain it as well, but that's exactly what what is going on. And as I say, I couldn't put it as well as you, but the actual results I have definitely felt, and they're very positive. And equally, when I haven't, and it's been remiss of me, you can feel the difference. And I know that might sound bit maybe a bit contrite, but it's true. Prior preparation, as they say, and I think that for things like that, it does work and it has helped. It doesn't mean that I want to go and I'm looking forward to going. It just means I'm more mentally prepared and better equipped to I suppose in some respects enjoy it and get more out of it. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think being intentional about why am I going and how do I want to feel is so much more helpful. And if we can delve in, we won't, but we could delve into quantum physics and particle behavior and why our energy should be aligned towards what we do want. Because when it's aligned to what we don't want, hey, guess what? That's what we get.
Yeah.
And I think you and I have played around with this a little bit in relationships and also the parenting context. When we speak out what we do want to happen or do, or how we do want to behave, it is transformational, taking that different viewpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Chris, can I ask you, as a dad of teens, how have you incorporated some of these techniques into life?
Well, very challenging having a teenage young boys, as most people will attest to. But it's wonderful as well, and I suppose one thing that's very important to me is being as good a dad as I possibly can. And it's why I make particular decisions about lifestyle and obviously not obviously, but ending up where I am today. And it can be as equally stressful trying to bring up young boys as it can be, obviously, dealing with COVID and work. And I think, sometimes I suppose the first thing is getting cross, and getting cross obviously maybe make you feel better for a very small moment in time, but actually for me it nags at me for long periods of time because I don't want to behave in that way with my children. And so one thing, but there's been many. The first thing I'd say is that what sophrology has helped me do is remain calm, become calmer, and slow myself down and breathe and think. And my mother used to say, think before you speak. And I suppose in some ways that's kind of what I'm allowing myself to do through sophrology, is to just be calmer and just be more understanding, I suppose. So there's a moment of reflection that thinks, why is my child behaving like this or saying this or feeling this, which perhaps beforehand would have just been run over with my potential temper going up. So I think that's one thing that I think has been really, really, really helpful to me is just being calmer around the boys and being more thoughtful. And then I suppose there's this element of also ongoing engagement, because I think it's really important to keep my children engaged with me, so we keep talking, and I understand them more as they grow up because they go through these different stages of their lives. And a lot of things that we've gone through with sophrology is about how to do that, and techniques that I can use in the way that I speak to them to actually actively engage them in conversation with me, so I better understand where they're at. Maybe it could be around what their aspirations are. One of my boys at the moment is all about football. I mean, nothing else really matters. And that can affect his thought processes around a lot of other things that he kind of needs to be considering at his age. But by slowing down and listening to him, I can steer things in a direction which works for him, and still keeps football at the forefront of his mind, I suppose, is what's quite important at the moment. But I think it's an interesting thing. So I was going to say, it's just an interesting thing with sophrology because, like you said earlier on in this conversation, it's extremely broad, and there's so many tools that you can find within sophrology. It's not necessarily you're going to try and take on all of the things because maybe that's too much, but you kind of seek out the things that you will find useful to add. I know it's a bit of a cliche, to your toolbox that you can then use through life for yourself and for your family and for your children. And I have to say that's exactly what is happening for me as I go through this process.
That's amazing to hear, because the reason I was drawn to sophrology, Chris, above other therapeutic interventions, and this is because this is a very methodical process that we take people through. And the sophrology method, like you say, gives you a toolkit. What tool am I going to use for this? Am I going to use the bubble? Am I going to use the pause? Am I going to use visualization? Am I going to do future work? Am I going to go back and do capacities from the past? It's an amazing, amazing method that, like you say, can be used in so many different ways. And I love the fact that it's been really, really helpful in so many ways to you. And slow parenting. You can't
Yeah,
drive a car or steer a car at 90 miles an hour, and you can't steer your kids like that either.
no, absolutely. I absolutely agree. And as I say, I think I spoke right at the beginning about Dad one or Chris one and Chris two, and I suppose that applies Dad one and Dad two. And I think my boys would honestly acknowledge that there has been a positive change. Let me say, I wasn't a bad dad before. It's just that there's always opportunities to improve, and I think that we all get. I don't know any parent that hasn't got cross or doesn't get cross with their children for one thing or another. And I think that when you use Sophrology, you kind of look at those situations through a completely different lens, and it changes that interaction. The child doesn't run off really, really cross. Also, you don't go storming off. You kind of the situation manifests in a different way, in a much more positive way, and actually more positive things come out of it rather than kind of a Mexican standoff or well, I don't know, some kind of new rule or regulation being brought in because they're not allowed to do this anymore, whatever that might be.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting because the last thing we want to do is be dishing out punishments and rules, because A, they're really unpleasant, and B, they're really hard to enforce, especially with technology and kids with phones. It wasn't like you and I got grounded and the door was locked and you couldn't get out. It just doesn't work like that anymore. And I
No,
think parenting 2.0 is coming. We're moving into how do you parent from this sort of weird technological age where we can't really see, you can't see if the kids have had a phone call from somebody horrid on the landline. You just can't see what's going on. So you do need a completely different toolkit.
yeah, absolutely.
Yes, sorry, Chris, I interrupted you then, but it's a fascinating. We could talk for hours about this, but something I do want to talk about with you is your business, because you've got a very, very strong strategic business background. You're a serial entrepreneur, and at the moment, you are absolutely wedded to creating an incredible, sustainable furniture business. And there's a big conversation here about how that works, your own responsibility as a human being, the environmental impact. And I'd love you to talk a bit about that and the challenges and how that's sort of manifesting in your life at the moment.
Okay, yeah, there's quite a few questions there. So, um, I suppose you talked about sustainability, and when we started this business, we absolutely wanted and still want to move forward in the most sustainable way that we possibly can. And I think with any business or any idea, you have these grand views. It may be whether it's sustainability, it may be whether you want to scale the business to be, multi-million, multi-billion. There's all these kind of things that go around in your mind, when you're starting a business. And you have all the best intent and all the will in the world to want to make those things happen. And then you're faced, I suppose, with the reality of what is really available to you. And also your understanding of, in my area, in terms of available products, becomes much more knowledgeable. And so we always seek out sustainable products. But I suppose the thing is that you're wedded in our industry to material manufacturers. And so you can only be as good as the products that you want to use within your designs. And you can look at some of the practices, and obviously everyone's got these huge reports that you can read, and it's very difficult to decipher whether it's greenwash or whether it's actually really true. I suppose what you can see is there an intent there, and are they kind of trying to go in the right direction, the direction that you understand? So that's kind of the first thing. The second thing is like, what's the longevity of the product that you're looking to deploy? Because you could have a product which maybe its credentials are slightly better, on its environmental impact in the short term, but actually, does that product last? Is it strong enough to work in the environment that it's being placed in? And if it's not, how often are you going to have to replace that? And what is the cost to the environment of replacing it on a regular basis? And then how easily can that be brought back into the system to be recycled? So these are things that we are kind of challenged with, and things that we need to understand. And it's a minefield, especially for a very small business that doesn't have infinite resource, that is trying to do its best. But we have found some really nice products. We work with Forbo, which is 95% natural material. We work with a brand called Alpi, which is reconstituted wood. So they're taking wood, all old stuff, whatever, and they're reconstituting it into these absolutely incredible patterns, which are like wood veneers that create some absolutely beautiful furniture. And then we're working with brands like Phoenix, who have a very clear outline of where they want to go or are going. And, you have to kind of try and read between the lines. But their product is well, firstly, obviously it's beautiful, but also it's very robust, and it will stand the test of time. So we look at it in different ways, and we look at it, what's it made of? How easy is it to bring back into the environment? And what is it like? How long is it likely to serve as a product? And we're doing our best, but is our best the best it can be? No, I wouldn't say it is, because the bandwidth that you need to try and analyze every single product and understand every single product or every single company in detail is really very, very difficult. You need people, and so that side of things is very challenging. So we are very conscious. We are very considerate. We do look at the materials that we're using. We do try and understand, and we will walk away from materials which we think don't have the right or on the right path. But we are very much at the behest of the materials that are out there, that are the breadth of materials that are out there that we can which we can choose from isn't infinite. So we do use a lot of wood veneers, and we, just to say, we do use a lot of Alpi, and we do try to understand and put into practice, choosing the best suppliers that are the most considerate of the environment.
You and I have talked about this because one of your core values is obviously quality and high standards, and that's part of your personal value set that we've explored. And I think if we cut you down the middle, it would run through everything you do. This very high standard, quality, in-depth, sympathetic, sustainable mindset that you've got. We've talked a lot about expectation minus reality equals disappointment. It's one of my favourite little sums. And you've just explained there how challenging that is when you're out in the marketplace looking for suppliers, and your expectations or your desires don't always align with what you find. There's a balance there. Tell me a little about some of the ways in your mind that you deal with that.
In terms of the choice of the materials, are you kind of...
As an entrepreneur, when you're in that situation that you've got, your vision is massive, And
Okay, understand.
it's so compelling, but of course it's contained by what you find available to you, of course.
Yeah, I think I suppose it's contained by yourself as well as all the other things around you. If I'm answering this question correctly, I answered the question correctly. Um, so with our business, I suppose we could grow it, um, but actually, you know, there are challenges within manufacturing. There are challenges in with our, the choice of materials, the sustainability. There's a challenges with um, onboarding new people, and I suppose even if you did, I suppose for me, have a view that this business can go somewhere, but actually you have to reset and actually look at what is around you and what is actually realistic for you as an individual, and actually in partnership with my wife because we work together, and then deciding, how much do you want to push that. I'm just going to quote something which might help explain this a little bit better. Um, the World Bank do a survey every year about ease of doing business, and France, I think this year was number 32 on that ranking, and the UK is number 8. And it looks at all facets from starting a business, taxation, etc. And I think, one thing for us, having lived in France for so long, for 22 years, is that itself is a challenge. And, the idea of maybe growing a business in the UK versus growing in business in France is quite different. I had a business in the UK, and I think the challenges there and where you set yourself are very different to certainly going later on in life, are different to France. So there's probably more restriction here in order to scale a business. So one has to kind of temper that in to oneself, just kind of say, well, actually, going from 0 to 10 million is a very different task in France than it is to the UK. So therefore, I must temper that inside and say, actually, what's more realistic is, maybe a million turnover. Or is that kind of is that explaining?
Yes, and I'm sorry, my question wasn't terribly clear, but I think you're right. It's about being aware of where you are, what the environment's actually doing, what the business environment's like where you are locally. And we did a lot of perspective work. Remember, we have the Plastic Men where we put ourselves at the centre and we contemplate sort of where am I? And you're right. This is a very different environment than if you were in another country. That's just the way the world works.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, so yeah, in essence, really, what I was saying is that, instead of just kind of tearing into it, just being a bit more reflective, thinking about the challenges around oneself, whether it's whether it's by location, whether it's by suppliers, whether it's by your own desire or willingness to go through a process to a certain extent, and then building and planning around that. And I think, if Sophrology has helped me kind of not necessarily temper, but understand better what I want from my business, and therefore set myself up accordingly to go through that process with the business.
That's amazing, Chris. I think we lose sight of our desire sometimes when we're looking at those balance sheets or the bank account. And it's so much more, being an entrepreneur and being a leader, it's so much more than just that scalability or that and loss account. And yeah, I'm so delighted that you've shared that, because we're not applying Sophrology as a business tool across Europe necessarily all the time, but when it is used in that context, it becomes so helpful for us to dial into, okay, how do I really feel? Where are my values and my desires? And what do I actually want? And then how do I achieve that in the environment that I'm in, or not,
Yeah,
as the case may
I
be?
think actually, in answer to your earlier question and what you just said there, I think what Sophrology allowed me to do was actually truly understand what I want. And I think beforehand, I wasn't sure. So there were sometimes grandiose ideas which apply a certain pressure and make you set yourself up in a particular way. And actually, what I want is a nice small business that allows me to spend time with my family and with my children, and something that I'm proud of, I suppose, is very important. And it's not what may have been what I wanted, maybe what I thought I wanted before, which is to turn it into this huge, business that requires something, I suppose, that I'm now not actually willing to give to it. And I think it's that recognition that has come through the time we spent doing sophrology and really understanding what is it that I actually really want going forward.
That's amazing, because it's all about being conscious. Is this actually what I want? Am I conscious of my desires, or am I just running this race? And of course, when you fall into one of those algorithms on your social media channels and you're driven suddenly down some echo chamber of whatever it is you're looking at. I mean, skiing videos or cat video, that's just the way the world has been designed. And when we dial back into our inner world, that's where the truth lies.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exciting stuff, Chris. There's always a million questions I could ask you, and I think I will obviously in the show notes make sure that we link some of those suppliers and also your own furniture business, Berchen, which is just quite phenomenal. I recommend everybody looks at that and contemplates whether they could incorporate that into their own lifestyles. But I just want to finish by talking about the amazing book, Michael Singer, The Untethered Soul, which you brought to me as a client. How did you come across that book? Because it's changed my life.
Well, it's funny you talked about referrals earlier on, and I think it's that, isn't it? It's when you're going through a challenging period, you speak to close friends, and they turn around and say, "Do you know what? I've not had a dissimilar experience, and I've either gone to Sophrology or I've read this book." And so it was a good friend of mine who I bike with, and he said to me, "Have a read of this." And I said, "Okay, I'll give it a go." He said, "It's so good, I've read it twice. I read it once and then went straight back and read it again." I actually read it in a very different way. I read it slowly and worked on putting into practice what Michael Singer says as you go through. And it is a fantastic book. And I'm glad I came across it, and I'm glad I passed it on to you, because I kind of I bought it for people's Christmas presents and birthdays abound. So it's one of those books I think everyone should have a copy of.
It's a phenomenal book. And I think that the practice sounds so obvious, this open-hearted practice. But the reality is we live with this closed-hearted sort of miserly physical and mental attitude. And I feel it. Now I've read the book, I almost wish I hadn't. I feel it every day. I'm like, oh, I'm in that place again. And it's so hard, especially in relationships with conflict, where you're trying to protect yourself or you're defending yourself against the world, to remain open-hearted. I mean, it's the life's work and beyond, I think.
Yeah. I mean, there's two books that have been incredibly helpful to me. One of them you just mentioned. One of them, and this is not a plug, but it's your book. And one of the things that I've found through the process and working with you with Sophrology is that I need routine. And
yes,
and what your book has helped me to do is to drive routine into normal everyday life. And as I went through the process, it's something that keeps you centered and keeps you checking in, especially because I use the Whoop as well every day, checking in, seeing how I am, checking on really important things, just like quite basic, but just water intake and quality of food, etc., and sleep, and things that you kind of just take for granted or you're just not conscious of. And just thinking about how you want to feel each day is really something that's very important. Well, certainly I found very important, and I found it possible because I utilised your book and the process therefore outlined within. And I found that incredible, and I still use it. So yeah,
Thank
thank
you
you for that.
so much. And I wrote the book because I had to have a tool to try and help people stay accountable, and including myself. When we have a routine and we think about how do I want to feel today, not oh I feel terrible. If I could choose, because I can choose, how do I want to
Mm,
feel? And then making sure that we nail those 5 pillars of well-being as best we can every day, and reminding ourselves, nutrition, hydration, sleep, relaxation, recovery, purpose and exercise are absolutely
mm,
essential.
mm.
When one drops, you're building on sand.
Yeah.
You know yourself, it's very hard to maintain anything when you lose any of those pillars. So thank you for reminding listeners that they should definitely head over to Amazon, purchase both those books. And the other thing I wanted to finish on, Chris, was podcasts, because I'm a podcast addict. I've started one myself. You and I have come across a few things we love, and we'd love to just refer people to those. Tell me, what are your top couple of podcasts at the moment?
Ride with Rob Warner and Elliot Jackson. I think it's called Ride or Ride On.
Yep.
And Dr. Rangan Chatterjee, which is he's just fantastic.
Amazing. I love the fact that you're listening to biking podcasts, because those guys are super entertaining, and you know my love of biking as well, but also
Yeah.
listening to Rangan Chatterjee at the same time. You couldn't ask for two more different podcasts, but both hitting the mark in a similar kind of way.
Yeah, I think, Rob Warner and Elliot Jackson talk to incredibly inspirational people. So the most recent one I listened to was, and I can't remember the guy's name, but he'd cycled around the world twice on a penny farthing. And so
Of course.
that's just incredible. Or you're listening, to, some of the most amazing downhill mountain bike racers, and what they go through. And you talked about mental preparation. So they talk about that and the things that they do, in order to be able to race at the level that they do. And I find that incredibly, interesting, because again, I'm not saying that I'm racing World Cup downhill, far from it, but there's lots of things that you can pick up from that and apply to yourself in your own way. And then, Dr. Rangan Chatterjee, he has some unbelievably amazing people come on to talk about diet, to talk about well-being, and it's just very inspirational. So they're both inspirational, but kind of maybe focused on slightly different things.
I love that the way these things intersect. And my recommendation of the week would be the Jonny and Matthew Wilkinson podcast X. Honestly, you must have a listen. They've just finished the second series, I think, this summer. But they go so deep, but they relate it all back to rugby. And I'm not a big fan of rugby. So I've just been intrigued about how they're experiencing the mind-body connection. And they're on this journey that you and I are on of, let's call it enlightenment, for want of a better word. But it comes across in every single podcast and every single interview they do. It's well worth a listen, because you just think, we're human beings. We are amazing. So much out there. Well, Chris, I can't thank you enough for your time today. And I look forward to another conversation. All the links are going to be down below. We'll link those podcasts, your own business, and those suppliers if you're happy to do so. And we will speak again soon, I hope.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Lindsay. It's been great. Thank you very much.